What's your scariest stalking experience? I was a shift leader at a Taco Bell. I was always on the floor with my crew, so I was at the front registers or the drive-through register quite often. I was 24, married, with 2 small children, and I only lived a few streets away from my store. I would often walk to work to save gas. A guy a little older than me started coming in a lot. He was always very friendly, almost too friendly. He'd only come in on my shifts. I started to find out, and then it turned out he was there for every single one of my shifts. I'd told my husband, so I don't think he ever came to our house, but he was a shadow at work. Then, one day, I came in and found him being trained by one of the assistant managers. He tried to get put on my shifts, but I freaked out and immediately went to the office to talk to the store manager. She had no idea about how he'd been in the store all the time. She knew there was a guy, but she didn't know it was him. She was horrified. She promised that she'd keep him away from me until she could get him transferred to another store. She called the store closest while I was standing there and got the transfer. He'd be at our store for that day only. His next day would be at the other store and it would be his home store. She let me take the day off. She called in the other night shift manager. When I came to work the next day, she said that he'd not taken the news. Well, that he'd have to work at the other store and quit. He came a few more times after that, so I got my husband to sit in the dining room to scare him off. I did not see him again after that. Was stalked by a work colleague. I told my boss and other people at work and no one gave a shit, and the stalking got worse. He would stand at traffic lights watching how I get home every day. One day, at a set of red lights, he was acting more shifty than usual, so I watched him from the corner of my eye. I saw a long screwdriver slip from his sleeve and he rushed at me. I jumped the lights and speeded home. I turned up to work later in the day during the late shift and handed in my keys, notice, and never went back again. I had a stalker when I was a teenager, but I never found out who it was. For a long time I would just notice little weird stuff, someone in the backyard at night, tapping on my window, but I wrote a lot of it off as possible pranks or whatever until one night I was up late on the computer. It was like 2 a.m. My parents were asleep in bed and the doorbell rang. I went to my parents' room and woke them up. They said they didn't hear it and the dog wasn't barking, so they told me to go to bed, so I did. But next morning my dad found a pile of cigarette butts outside the window where I had been on the computer. When I was in high school, the mother of a friend of mine became kind of obsessed with me. One time, when I was 16, she told me she needed to talk to me in private, and I assumed it was about my friend, so I met with her, and it turned out that she was looking for a romantic encounter. She told me that her marriage was unhappy, and that she wanted to be with me. One was a dumb kid and had no idea how to handle it, because I didn't want to wreck my friend's family by saying anything. It got to the point where she would drive around my neighborhood in her minivan, looking for me, because she knew I liked to take walks at night. It eventually ended up in a screaming fight between me and her in a huge rainstorm, because she wouldn't leave me alone. That was what finally convinced me I needed help, so I told my parents about it, and it stopped. She eventually ended up divorcing her husband and moving across the country. I never saw her again. Joined some Discord servers during the pandemic and met cool people, including a chick from my city. We became friendly, chatted in server, and then she slid into my DMs asking personal questions and being flirty. I reciprocated until she wanted to go out. I declined and stopped DMing her. As time went on, I shared some pics and vids in the server while walking my dog, while it was snowing and whatnot. And this chick figured out where I lived using what I shared in Google Maps. She showed up at my house unannounced. I told her to leave, but she stayed in my backyard in the freezing cold, begging me to let her in. She got mad and yelled about it being cold and me leaving her stranded. My neighbor came out and told me to head inside. She'll be my witness and will call the cops if necessary. I never had someone I never met just show up at my house like that. It made me really careful about what I share and with whom. You'll tell a different one. So I came out as gay after high school in 2011 or so. The bully called me names for years for being me, I guess. I'm not effeminate, I'm not horrible to people, and I literally didn't know what his issue was. Guess you can see where this is going. Anyway, after finally confirming his thoughts or whatever about me, he stalked me for a good 2 years. Now Cape Town is small, but not that small. He would turn up randomly at my work, places I went to with my friends, etc. Thing is, at the time I didn't really see it as that, just that, why the fuck do I keep seeing this guy everywhere? Then one night I was closing up, he comes up to me and starts blurting out everything. Drunk as a skunk, but I got the message. He'd been in love with me in hydrogen sulfide, and just couldn't get over it. Told him to fuck off. I'm not one to mince my words, but I do regret that. Thought that was it. Nope. Turned up to my flat. Drunk again. Called the police. Finally he fucked off after that. Thing is, he was the HS cricket star and no one believed me except my best friend and roommate at the time. He would send me long, rambling text messages nearly every day. They could get very creepy, how I could not deny what was meant to be, that I was already a part of him and that he could already feel my blood coursing through his veins constantly. I took all the professional advice and never one time responded to any of his messages. One autumn evening, however, he let something slip in a particular text message that made me realize that he had been standing outside of my flat on the walkway opposite watching me all that time. I went back and reread some of his messages, and with the benefit of hindsight I could tell that this had been going on for some time. And still not one single fucking thing I could do about it. After all, he hadn't violated any laws, only my sanity, his own dignity, and all manner of human decency. It's funny. Prior to this, I thought stalking was, I don't know, kinda cute. I'm posting this up in the hopes ye save lives. I was stalked by an apartment handyman. The worst part was his male coworkers were complaining about him too. I walked into the apartment complex office to use the restroom there and overheard a discussion about how he was upsetting everyone and smoking drugs in vacant apartments during his work breaks. Even with all this happening, he was still tolerated by the owner, so I broke my lease and moved. So if you tour apartments to rent, make sure you don't end up in this situation. At the time I had weird work hours and often had cash on me. So I figured he was going to break into my place eventually. My senior year of high school, I had this sophomore following me home and putting stuff in my locker. Found a dead bird in my mailbox the day after prom. My dad was a corrections officer for the state. He was always very careful about never bringing any personal info into the facility, but his brother, also a guard there, was an asshole. It was probably through him that an inmate got our address. So this inmate serves his time and is released. My dad did not even remember this guy. There was no bad blood or anything, so we assume it was just a case of getting back at any guard. Also, my dad had 2 daughters. My sister at this time was 17 or 18 and I was 11. This was in the 1990s, so we didn't have cell phones, etc. The guy started leaving stuff on my sister's car, letters, dead roses, etc. We lived in a very rural area, so it wasn't hard to sneak onto the property at night. Then he started appearing in the woods across the street while I was alone waiting for the school bus. Thankfully my adult neighbor saw him because I didn't. My neighbor got up early every morning to wait for the bus with me until this was resolved. There was a bunch of other stuff, a lot of kept from me at time, but it was still scary. The state troopers got involved after the guy left a note threatening my sister and he went back to prison. Parole violations. He wasn't allowed in the facility where my dad worked anymore, so that was the last of it. After all that, my ex-husband's stalking was baby level. I just changed the locks and passwords. He's not very bright. When I was 16 or 17, met lots of people in chat rooms and would sometimes keep in touch through instant messaging. I think it was ICQ in those days. Anyway, one guy who said he was in his 20s became progressively creepier until I eventually blocked him. The only things he knew about me were my nickname and my state of residence. He lived a couple states away. About a month later someone knocks on the door. My mom answered, then came to my room and said, "There's a guy here asking for you, says his name is." She looked suspicious and was, because as she later told me, he looked to be at least 35. I recognized the name, told her to tell him I was asleep and please, call the cops. She did. They came and took statements from us. They had a description of the car he was driving from my mom. Found him the next street over evidently. We lived in a mountain town, so it was downhill from our house, meaning the house was visible from the street he parked on, and, since he hadn't done anything really, they just told him it would be best if he left. He did, and was probably really embarrassed by the whole thing, but holy shit, that was terrifying for me. I became much more cautious about strangers online after that. I was obsessed with a girl during my senior year. So I started to take pictures of her in my mobile and started following her in social media. There was time when I used to wait for her to post something online so that I could save it. Now she is married. All of her pictures and videos are in my drive. The thing is, I don't feel pretty safe that the data might be stolen or leaked. Is there any solutions? Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe. My aim is 500 subscribers so I can monetize my channel and get that dollar bill.